Chapter 1: Managing Information. It cannot be denied that the overwhelming amount of information available to us today assists us in many ways as we go about our daily lives. You can quickly access more or less useful information for even the most trivial things in life in just a few seconds. For these mundane and relatively unimportant things, inaccuracies in the information retrieved will likely not have a catastrophic impact on our lives. We simply move on and find a better recipe than the one we tried before. However, for the more high-impact events, the overwhelming amount of conflicting information, which often claim to be the facts, can indeed have a profound impact. Most of us understand that, at least intellectually, but not always emotionally. And so, it is understandable that it may cause anxiety as we find it difficult to know what the truth actually is. Whom and what can we trust? Too much information is indistinguishable from chaos. One common theme is that people often tend to reduce and simplify the information available to them to make it more digestible and manageable. You see something and you quickly draw conclusions from it, you form an opinion, and then you move on. We simply don't have the time or energy to spend too much time investigating the validity of all the information that we are bombarded with. So we sort it by applying a kind of information triage. One of the dangers with this is that we are risking applying low-resolution thinking to a high-resolution problem. As the author of this paper, I will be the first one to admit that I was frequently guilty of that when I was young. I knew it all, I saw something, quickly formed an opinion about it, and I just knew that I was right. After having fallen flat on my face many times, I learned that maybe I don't know it all. The older one gets generally you realize how little you know. This is because when you face a challenge, and you give yourself the time to analyze it in a real sense, you often come to realize that the problem you were looking at consisted of many more layers of complexities that you did not know of, or even were capable of imagining. That tends to humble you, and that is a good thing. Some other common themes are people deciding which sources of information that can be trusted, and they trust them blindly, never questioning its validity. All other sources are wrong or intentionally putting out false information. These people tend to adopt the narratives and approaches that is being hidden, and often not so hidden, by whatever source is disseminating the information. It may be wise to keep in mind that media sources, as an example, tend to agree with whoever is funding them. Then there is the theme of the constant skeptics who have decided that all information available to them is false or fake, and they are left in an information vacuum where they will develop their own ideas of how it really is. These ideas can be more or less accurate, but it is not uncommon for them to be accused of being conspiracy theorists and therefore swiftly dismissed from any serious debates. This does not help in promoting a common understanding, but further alienates them and confirming what they already knew, which is, it's all a lie. Further polarization comes as an inevitable side effect. If you don't watch the news, you're uninformed. If you watch the news, you're misinformed. It is not uncommon for people to worry and be concerned over things that are out of their control. However, whether you worry about it or not doesn't change the circumstances that are out of your reach. But one thing you can control at all times is your own attitude. No matter what is happening around you, you are always the one, and the only one, who has the power to regulate yourself. It is in your hands. If you can remind yourself of that, There is a good chance that you can redirect the energy you wasted on worrying over things you cannot control to gathering, analysing, processing and hypothesizing information to reach some conclusions that then guides your further actions. The only one that has your interests as his or her primary interest is you. When you draw conclusions after processing the information, you will likely find that there are a series of assumptions that you'll need to make. Yes, the absolute truth is something you may not ever find valid evidence for. But if you don't draw some conclusions, you may get stuck in a situation of inaction, and no action is also an action. Certain situations require a decision to be made, and it will often have to be based on your own instincts, sound judgment, and experience. This is simply the nature of uncertainty, and we are best served by finding a way to interact with it and to adapt to it. Accept the existence of uncertainties and then adapt to the realities that they may lead to. If you find yourself going in the same direction as everyone else, it is time to stop and reflect. As your conclusions and subsequent actions will, to some extent, be based on assumptions, you may not be able to back it all up with valid evidence to yourself, and especially not to others. You can learn how to deal with it as you gradually accept and adapt to the existence of uncertainty. However, it is generally not a good idea to force your conclusions onto others. Keep them to yourself unless there is a good and valid reason to share them with others. Telling the truth is a good thing, but every truth doesn't have to be told. If someone shows a genuine interest in them and does so for non-malicious reasons, purposes, then feel free to share. They may help others in sorting out their own thoughts. Just be open and honest with the assumptions that you had to make to reach your conclusions. The recipient can then decide for themselves to what extent they agree with your conclusions. It is not what we don't know that gets us into trouble. It is what we know that just ain't so. In daily conversations, people often use the expression common sense. It is used in a way that assumes that common sense is some kind of universal truth that we all subscribe to and that does not need to be further elaborated on. But what is common sense to you may not be common sense to others. Common sense is therefore subjective, and we are best served by explaining the content, the actual meaning of what we mean by common sense. Not to assume that we all have the same understanding of what common sense is. Common sense is not so common. It is therefore good practice to be precise in your wording. There are many words to choose from, and the more carefully we select them, the better and more precisely you craft your language, the more likely you are to be understood the way you wish to be understood. It will reduce the likelihood of misinterpretation and the potentially undesirable consequences of that. You can condition yourself to dare to think of the unthinkable. There are many scenarios of more or less catastrophic consequences that the majority of people choose not to think of at all. In my estimation, there could be two main reasons for this. The first reason, I would argue, is that people tend to think that the most catastrophic scenarios either won't happen at all, or they are very unlikely to happen, and that it's therefore not worth spending time thinking of them. The second reason is that those scenarios are simply too scary to think of, let alone to process them and what they could lead to for you and those close to you. It is possible that this is some kind of defense mechanism because no one wants to live their life in total fear, as this somewhat diminishes the joy of being alive. If your thoughts are filled with nothing but fear and hopelessness, your life becomes miserable. You don't live, but you merely exist. If you can gather the courage to allow yourself to think of the unthinkable, it will surely be scary at first. But as with any fear, the remedy that works is often to keep exposing yourself to that fear. In other words, the second time you sit down and think of these catastrophic scenarios will likely be a little less scary than the first time you did it. As the fear and discomfort gradually decreases, you can shift your attention to what you would do and how you can reasonably prepare yourself for those scenarios. Luck is not a strategy. Be careful, however. Don't let it consume you. Make a concerted effort in regulating the importance of it and how much time you should spend on it. If it consumes you, you're likely going to start neglecting your everyday life. It is a matter of keeping a somewhat healthy approach to it. Dare to think of it. Think of your options in case they become reality, make reasonable practical arrangements, and then move on with your life. Proposed approach and key takeaways to consider. 1. Accept the existence of uncertainty and then adapt to it rather than wasting your precious energy on wishing that it didn't exist. 2. Don't follow others blindly. 3. It is up to you to validate, analyze, and hypothesize information available to you. 4. Don't fully and blindly trust any source of information. 5. Collect information from various sources, filter away the noise, cross-reference what's relevant. But don't let others process it for you into actionable intelligence. That's your job. 6. Trust your own instincts, your sound judgment, your knowledge and experience. They kept you alive so far. 7. Apply the appropriate level of analysis to the problem at hand. A high-resolution problem usually requires a high-resolution analysis. The high-resolution analysis will then need to be boiled down into something understandable and actionable. 8. Don't be too quick with jumping to conclusions. There are often more levels of complexity involved than you can think of or even imagine. Take your time whenever it is possible to do so. 9. Just because most or all people around you interpret something the same way doesn't necessarily make it true or even right for you. Observe and carefully craft your own opinion. 10. Don't force your conclusions onto others because you may not have valid evidence to back it all up with. But if somebody asks for it, in a genuine and non-malicious way, share it and be open with what assumptions you've made to reach those conclusions. 11. Be precise in your wording when communicating important things to others. 12. Dare to think of the unthinkable, but don't let it consume you.